Morning light spilled through the diner's wide glass, pooling in amber squares across the tiled floor. The scrambled eggs smelled of bacon grease, burnt toast, and fresh brewed coffee, the scent of every small-town morning, from here to Carolina Bay. Frank Ellison sat in his usual booth beneath the humming neon clock, a steady hand stirring 2 cubes of sugar into the dark liquid. The spoon clinked once, twice. He liked that sound, measured, certain. 2 men stepped inside, younger, broader, their confidence entering before they did. Civilian clothes, but the posture gave them away, operators home on downtime shoulders, squared as if still under command. They spotted Frank's sleeve rolled just high enough to show a faded black circle and a serpent swallowing its tail. "Hey, look at that one," said, sliding into the next booth. "You get that ink out of a cereal box, old-timer." The other laughed. "Must have come free with the coffee." The joke spread across the diner like static. Betty Carter, the waitress, froze mid-pour, the stream of coffee trembling in the pot. A couple of regulars lowered their eyes. Frank didn't look up. He finished his stir, set the spoon down, and took a small sip. The motion was deliberate, as if this act, this ritual of sugar and steam, mattered more than anything the boys could say. "Come on, sir," the first man pressed, voice loud enough to claim the room. "That's supposed to be some kind of unit mark." "Never seen it before." "You wearing that for attention? People call that stolen valor, you know." The words hung heavier than the smell of fried eggs. Then silence pooled again, thick waiting. Frank's eyes finally lifted. Pale gray, steady, unreadable. "It's just something from a long time ago," he said quietly. The younger man smirked, mistaking calm for weakness. "Yeah, from where Boy Scout camp." His friend snorted. The laughter bounced off the chrome counter. Betty's knuckles whitened around the pot handle. She wanted to speak, but something in Frank's stillness kept her anchored. Outside, a truck engine coughed and faded. Even the radio behind the counter seemed to hesitate. Frank exhaled through his nose. "You boys finished." The tone wasn't sharp. It was level, the voice of someone who'd seen tempests larger than this. "Just asking questions, old man." He nodded once, eyes on the swirling coffee. "Questions deserve answers. Maybe someday you'll earn them." The first operator blinked, thrown by the phrasing. It wasn't defiance, it was instruction, and it landed harder than any retort. The booth creaked as he leaned forward, but before he could answer, the diner door opened, a gust of cold air chasing the smell of rain through the room. The bell above it gave a single metallic note and stilled. Still, nobody spoke. Frank set the mug down gently. The faint ring it made against the saucer marked the end of something invisible. A heartbeat later, Betty found her voice again, soft but shaking. "They don't know who he is, do they?" she whispered to the man at the counter. The man only shook his head. "Not yet," he said. Outside, the neon clock kept humming, keeping its own kind of time. The laughter from the booth still lingered, but it had thinned, uneasy now, brittle around the edges. Betty Carter set the coffee pot back on its warmer and wiped her hands on her apron. Her reflection stared back at her from the chrome, older than she felt a moment ago. In the mirrored glass behind the counter, the 2 younger men were still grinning, but no one else in the diner shared it. A few regulars exchanged glances over cooling pancakes. The clink of silverware had stopped. Even the clock above the register seemed to tick louder. Frank Ellison hadn't moved. His hand rested near the mug, the faint outline of that faded tattoo visible under the morning light. An Ouroboros swallowing its own tail, edges blurred and soft with age. "Can't even tell what it is," the louder one muttered. "Looks like someone spilled ink on him." His friend's voice was lower. "Maybe just let it go, Miller." Miller chuckled. Relax, Reyes. We're just having fun. Across the counter, Betty reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered, unsure. Then she scrolled to a single contact labeled Stacy Base Office. Her thumb hesitated again. Then she tapped. "Hey, it's me," she whispered, glancing toward the booth. "I've got something strange happening down here at the diner. Two of your Delta boys, I think. They're bothering an old man." On the other end came a short exhale. "Betty, we're off duty today. MPs can handle that." "No, listen." She lowered her voice further. "The man's name's Frank Ellison. He's got this tattoo like a circle with a serpent thing and a star inside." There was silence. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Long enough for Betty's heart to thump twice in her throat. Then the voice returned tight. "Say that again." She did. Did he say what it meant? No. A pause. Project Omega. Never heard of it, Betty offered, half hoping the name might mean nothing at all. The line went dead. She stared at the phone, hearing only the soft hum of the ceiling fan above her. The screen dimmed, and her reflection looked back, eyes wide, breath shallow. Her hand trembled as she set the phone down on the counter. Still, the diner noise hadn't returned. Miller leaned back, oblivious to the weight that had just entered the room. "You know, if people wear things they didn't earn, it kind of cheapens the real deal," he said to no one in particular. A man at the far table cleared his throat, but said nothing. The quiet felt physical now, thick enough to slow motion. Betty picked up a towel, wiping a counter that didn't need it. "You boys want anything else?" she asked, voice steady out of habit. Miller smirked. "We're good, ma'am. Just trying to educate the locals." Frank's eyes lifted for half a second. "Some lessons teach themselves," he said. His tone wasn't sharp, it was weary, like a bell rung too many times. A small gasp rippled from a booth near the window. The old man had finally spoken, and the room held its breath as if afraid to miss the next word. None came. He turned back to his coffee. Outside, sunlight danced through the diner's front glass, catching in the dust motes like tiny suspended stars. Inside, the air was thick with things unspoken, and the pancakes on the counter had gone cold. The rain started just after 10. A soft hiss against the diner windows, steady, unhurried, like the world itself taking a long, slow breath. Frank Ellison sat alone now. The two young operators had drifted outside to smoke, still convinced they'd won whatever it was they thought this was. Betty moved quietly behind the counter, her eyes flicking toward him every few seconds. No one else dared speak. He stared at the dark reflection in the window, his own lined face floating against the glass. For a moment, the neon letters of the scrambled egg reversed themselves and looked like shapes from another world. The circle of the sign bled into the circle of the tattoo on his forearm, both faint and glowing at once. Then the years fell away. The hiss of the rain became something heavier, the rhythmic thump of rotor blades far away chopping the sky into uneven pieces. The smell of coffee folded into the thick scent of jungle rot and damp soil. Then the glass in front of him wasn't a window anymore, but the surface of a river, brown and restless beneath a monsoon sky. He could see them again. 5 young men crouched in the mud shirts, stripped to the waist, the air humming with insects. Someone whispered, "Day with me, Pat." His own hands, steady even then, pressed a strip of bamboo into another man's skin. A circle, a serpent swallowing its tail, a star at the center. Not decoration, a mark of survival. The promise they'd made to remember the ones who wouldn't be there when the dust cleared. The jungle was alive with its own kind of silence. He remembered the heat, the rain falling sideways, and the way that star had gleamed for a heartbeat before the mud covered it. No flag, no medals, just ink and memory. Still, the scene shifted. A younger officer crouched beside him, face streaked with sweat and fear. Lieutenant Thorne, someone had called him then. Not the general he would become, just a kid who hadn't learned to hide the tremor in his hands. "You're bleeding," Frank had said. "So are you," Thorne answered, trying to grin. Frank had smiled back. "Then we're still here." He blinked, and the rain returned to being just rain. The jungle was gone. The diner light was soft again, puddling on the counter. He looked down at his arm, the ink faded now, edges swallowed by years. Beneath it, the skin was thin, almost translucent, showing a faint map of veins and stories. A voice came from somewhere behind him. "Betty." "You all right, Mr. Ellison?" He nodded. "Just thinking about old friends." "You served with that General Thorne they talk about?" she asked, tentative. His gaze stayed on the window. "Once," he said. "A long time ago." The radio above the counter crackled, then faded into static. For a brief instant, buried under the noise, he could almost hear it again, the distant whump-whump of those blades cutting through rain. Memory and present overlapped like reflections in glass, two lives staring at each other across time. Frank picked up his coffee. The cup was warm, real. The past, mercifully, was not. He took a slow sip and set it down with care. Outside, the rain kept its steady rhythm, erasing footprints and keeping secrets. The hum of rain had softened, leaving the diner in a hush so fragile it could break with a sigh. Frank Ellison still sat in his booth, coffee gone cold, eyes on nothing. The two operators stood near the door, now their laughter drained to silence. Then outside, the sound came, not sirens, not traffic, but the deep, synchronized growl of engines. 3 black Suburbans swept into the lot, headlights flaring against the wet glass. Every conversation that might have started died before the first word. The door swung open. A gust of wind carried in the sharp scent of rain and starched uniforms. General Marcus Thorne stepped inside. 4 stars on his collar caught the light like shards of winter sun. He paused at the threshold, scanning the room. No one breathed. He moved forward, slow, deliberate, the air following him, as if it owed him gravity. When he stopped at Frank's booth, he looked down at the old man, who still hadn't risen. The mug in Frank's hand trembled slightly, the ripple on its surface catching a single beam of light. Thorne spoke quietly. "Mr. Ellison." Frank looked up, voice dry but steady. "Marcus." The younger soldiers blinked, their general's name on this old stranger's tongue. Thorne drew a breath, unbuttoned his cuff, and rolled up the sleeve. On his forearm, clear, black, unblurred, coiled the same serpent devouring its tail, the same star shining in the center. Gasps rippled through the room. The two operators froze where they stood. A fork slipped from someone's hand and hit a plate like a chime. Without a word, Thorne straightened to full attention. He clicked his heels, the sound sharp against the tile, and gave the slow, deliberate salute of a soldier who still believed in everything that gesture ever meant. Sunlight broke through the clouds outside, found the silver ring on his finger, and threw it across the diner like a blessing. No one moved. It wasn't a diner anymore. It was a chapel built of chrome and quiet. Betty's breath caught in her throat. Even the coffee machine hushed its hiss. Frank hesitated, then nodded once, a weary acceptance rather than pride. He didn't rise to meet the salute. He had already earned it decades ago. Thorne lowered his hand. His voice carried low and certain. "The man you mocked built the foundation you stand on." Miller swallowed hard, color draining from his face. Sir, I didn't know. You didn't ask, Thorne said. Everything you are was written by men like him. Reyes stepped forward, shame pulling at his shoulders. Sir, we're sorry. Frank finally spoke, tone quiet enough to force them closer to hear. Respect doesn't need apologies, just better memory. For a long moment, Thorne stood beside the booth, head bowed. Then he placed a hand gentle on the old man's shoulder. A bridge of years closing. Outside, the rain stopped. A faint beam of light found the steam rising from the coffee cup and turned it gold. Betty wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. A single tear, warm as the sunlight itself, traced down her cheek. Nobody clapped. Nobody dared speak. The salute hung there, invisible but eternal, echoing in the still air, long after the engines outside went quiet. By the next morning, the story had spread like light through an open window. Someone at the diner had taken a picture, just a grainy phone shot, the general standing in salute, the old man seated before him. It wasn't meant for headlines, but it found its way through base group chats, veterans forums, and quiet conversations that started with, "Did you hear?" At Fort Liberty, General Marcus Thorne stood before a room of officers and instructors. The air smelled faintly of coffee and chalk dust, the same mix that lingered in every training hall since the 70s. On the screen behind him glowed that same image, 2 generations, 1 gesture. No rank, no medals, just respect. Gentleman, Thorne said, voice carrying the calm weight of authority. We've spent years perfecting tactics. Maybe it's time we start teaching humility. A ripple of laughter moved through the room, uncertain but genuine. He let it settle, then continued. Effective immediately, every special operations course will include a legacy block. History. The kind that doesn't fit in a manual. He pointed to the photo. This is your first lesson. The man you see sitting there, Sergeant Major Frank Ellison, carried men through a jungle when I couldn't walk. We owe him, and all like him, more than silence. A young captain raised a hand. Sir, what'll we call it? Thorne smiled faintly. Legacy program sounds about right. Make sure it sticks. The applause wasn't loud, but it was steady like boots hitting ground in rhythm. It filled the hall with something clean, then a cut back to the diner. The morning rush had returned, but the air felt changed, lighter somehow. On the wall above the counter hung a framed copy of that same photo, a small brass plate beneath it, engraved, "Respect is learned." Betty adjusted the frame each morning before opening. Some customers still asked who the men were, and she'd just say, 2 soldiers who remembered what mattered. Outside, under the porch light that flickered from age, Frank Ellison stepped carefully onto the wet sidewalk. His coat collar was turned up, his gait slow but sure. The day smelled of rain and fresh bread from the bakery next door. Miller waited by the corner, hands in pockets, eyes down. He looked younger now, smaller somehow. Sir, he started. I came to apologize. Frank studied him for a beat, then smiled, a dry rasp of humor in it. Guess the coffee's stronger than your rank, son. The joke caught Miller off guard. He let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh. Sir, thank you. Frank nodded. Just remember it. They shook hands. Sunlight spilled across the diner windows, stretching their shadows, long and even across the linoleum floor. Inside, 2 shapes joined at the palm, the kind of handshake that means something. Still, the neon clock hummed its low electric tune, marking time not as minutes, but as proof that the world, for one small place and one small morning, had learned its lesson. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk and new paint. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of Fort Liberty's training annex, casting slow-moving bars across the rows of wooden desks. On the front wall hung a framed sketch of a serpent swallowing its tail, the star gleaming at its center. Beneath it, handwritten in careful block letters, one word stood alone: salute. The first session of the Legacy program was about to begin. The students, young operators, still sharp with ambition, sat straighter when General Thorne entered. He didn't speak right away. His eyes found the quiet man standing near the back, hands in pockets, jacket collar, turned up against the morning chill. Frank Ellison nodded once toward the general, then turned to face the class. His voice when he began was low but carried. You'll learn tactics, gear strategy. You'll think those things make you strong. But strength isn't loud. It's what you do when no one's watching. He paused, letting the words hang there like dust in sunlight. I was taught that by men who never came home. They didn't salute for show. They lived it. From the second row, Miller lifted his hand slightly. His face was older now, lined not by years, but by humility. Sir, he said, standing, I was wrong about everything. Frank looked at him, eyes steady, not judging. You learned, he said simply. That's all any of us ever get to do. The class was silent. Even the hum of the old fluorescent lights seemed to fade. General Thorne leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching his mentor teach a final lesson no manual could contain. Frank continued, voice softer now. This mark, he said, touching the faint circle on his arm, isn't about war. It's about memory, about carrying something worth standing for. He looked around the room. Every time you honor someone quietly, you salute them whether you raise your hand or not. A whisper moved through the room, the kind that isn't sound, but understanding. Then a radio on the back shelf hummed to life with static, catching a faint marching tune before fading again, as if the past itself was keeping time. They said the old instructor's tattoo looked like something from a cereal box, their laughter echoing across the diner's chrome booths and morning flaglight. Two Delta Force trainees scoffed, pressed him for proof, their arrogance loud enough to rattle the coffee cups. Then the doorbell rang, and a 4-star general stepped inside, rolled up his sleeve, and saluted, the same fading mark inked on the veteran's arm. Quietly, the diner fell still beneath the flag's soft flutter. Quiet men leave echoes, too. Frank's gaze shifted to the window where sunlight warmed the glass. The dust motes drifted lazily, turning golden. For a heartbeat, the reflection in the window showed two figures, one young, one old, standing side by side. He blinked and the image was gone, but the warmth stayed. Thorne stepped closer. We'll keep this program running, he said quietly, as long as there are people willing to listen. Frank smiled, faint and tired but real. They will, he said. The quiet ones always do. He turned toward the door. The students rose instinctively, no command, no order, just respect. For a moment, the room filled with a stillness that felt like prayer. As Frank stepped into the sunlight, the tattoo on his forearm caught the light, the serpent gleaming briefly as though alive. The radio behind him whispered the final refrain. The quiet ones taught us to stand tall. And with that, the door closed softly. The classroom emptied slowly, sunlight spilling across the chalkboard, where the hand-drawn serpent and star still waited, faint dust drifting through the quiet, like snow inside a memory. Frank lingered at the doorway, watching the younger men file past, each one brushing a hand against the small brass plaque that read, "Respect is learned," the proof of everything he'd tried to teach. Still, he smiled as General Thorne joined him, two silhouettes cast long across the linoleum floor, like an old photograph developing in real time. Outside, the flag stirred against the morning wind, and for a moment the soft rustle sounded like a salute. an invisible hand raised toward every quiet act that ever built a better world.